What the hell is a contract, right? Because, I mean, everybody you've ever dated, I'm pretty sure you never sat down and wrote out a contract, although you probably should have, probably would have made shit go a lot better. But I'm pretty sure we don't actually do this, right? But what I have in mind is relational contracts are the informed agreements upon terms of a relationship by participants within that relationship. They're the informed agreements, right, upon terms of a relationship by participants in that relationship, right? So it's not like you get a paper and pen out, right, and you write out this contract. No, what I have in mind is more of a metaphysical kind of contract, right? It's the agreements that you sort of make with your partner, the sort of agreements that you have with your partner. And I think that these agreements that we sort of make help constitute these obligations, right? So, how are these terms gathered? If I'm going to say, look, you know, relationships are governed by these sort of metaphysical contracts that we have with our partners, right? I need to say, well, how do we get these terms? Well, I think we get these terms in a couple of ways. The first way, I think, is that explicit verbalization, right? I might simply say to you, hey, don't have sex with anyone else outside this relationship, right? I might explicitly express that, like, or I might ask my friend Trill to say, hey, bro, I need a ride to the barbershop, right? I'll verbalize that. I'll express that verbally. If he accepts it, we have an agreement. Okay, now I'm expecting you to sort of, you know, scoop me, pick me up from the shop. Same thing in romantic relationships when we sort of have these explicit verbalizations and acceptance. And also from given context, right? And admittedly, I want to qualify this because this is a portion that I'm hopefully maybe being able to draw from you all a little bit later on. Because I do think that this happens phenomenologically, but I am having a very difficult time of articulating how it is that we actually do this. But what I have in mind is just this. So I say from given context. But let's say, I don't know, I'm talking to someone. Right? Let's say dating. We go on a date, right? Again, where this is like a social outgoing type thing. Let's say that this is at a movie. This is good. Let's say that this is at a movie. And, you know, we all seen the old school move, the sort of, right? The little yawn and arm do, right? But sometimes, if you're anything like me and your luck is anything like mine, the woman will move, right? Because and this happens, right? And usually, I mean, I might give it one more shot, right? But she usually moves again. And at this point, it's usually understood by me that, okay, look, this ain't like that. This is not that type of involvement, right? It seems to be the case that she's proposed a term, or at least rejected a term that I proposed, right? And after, I guess, in this example, the second time, we have this understanding, right? I won't try it again, right? And she might even expect me not to try it again, right? Based on her body language or something like that. And I do think that we do sort of establish terms of relationships in this way, but articulating how it is that we do that is been a bit problematic, so I'm wanting to sort of hear from you all later on. But what these things depend heavily on, right? What these things depend most heavily on is honesty, right? It depends on honesty, right? Because again, way to gather one and way to gather two are both forms of expression, be they verbal or be they through body or whatever, right? So we're expressing ourselves somehow, right? And it has to be honest because if it's a dishonest expression, right, that could be problematic for your contract, right? So if you say, if you're in a romantic relationship, for instance, and you make the dishonest claim, or I'll use an actual real life, I think, example, right? So say, for instance, you and a boyfriend, right, or a girlfriend, right? You guys go on a break, or whatever, right? And she explicitly verbalizes, I don't care, have sex with whoever you want to. We're not together, whatever, woo, 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 right? I'm ratchet on camera, man, woo, woo, woo. But you know, and we're like, okay, well, that's cool, you know, and say this person goes out and does engage in sexual activity with another person, and he and his former girlfriend actually get back together, right? And he's like, yeah, you know, while we were on that break, I actually took you up on your word and had sex with someone else. And she's like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to do that. You're just so irate, right? Well, that's going to confuse the hell out of him because it's like, well, you told me. You made an expression, right, that I could do this. that turned out, I guess in this case, to be dishonest, right? And I think that problems for our relationships and problems for our contracts arise when the terms of expression are dishonest, right? So these contracts really kind of depend on the honesty of expression, or it depends on the honesty of expression. I'll say that. Depends on the honesty of expression. If I'm honestly expressing a desire for non-monogamy, namely polyamory, right? Or if I'm expressing a desire for, say, homosexual partner as opposed to a heterosexual partner, right? I still think that I can have a valid relationship, right? Because my relationship ultimately is going to depend on the honesty of my expression, but the content of my expression is something that is not determined for me or for something else outside of me. It's determined by me, right? It's determined by me, right? That is, what I want or what I expect from this particular relationship depends on me, right? If I say, I expect you to, be sexually exclusive, you can either accept or reject that term, right? If we reject that term, okay, well, we're pretty much not compatible. Or if you accept that term, then we have an agreement, right? But we might have an agreement in this particular case that is contrary to the sociological paradigm, right? Namely monogamy. And I'm wanting to say that, well, since the obligations in a relationship are determined by a person's contract or by the relata's contract, it's morally, we might have some instances where it is morally permissible for things like polyamory, things like homosexuality. And the bigger idea is not just that we can have cases of this, right? But the bigger idea is that when we see polyamorous relationships or homosexual relationships, or even asexual relationships, if these persons were to come to the table and we say, hey, do you love him and do you love her? And they were to say yes, right? This is something that I've kind of been thinking about wanting to call a love report. We have to kind of take their love report at face value, right? And say, okay, well, you guys are in love then. Okay, well, let's try to best make sense of your love, right? If things like monogamy are inherently a part of love, then it would be the case that polyamorous relationships couldn't really be in love or something like that, or it's of a different kind, or sometimes we might even say of a lower quality, right? Because it's not this sort of highly idealized monogamous involvement. But I think that would be an inappropriate way of speaking because, again, it wouldn't seem to be the case that they would be doing anything different than persons who are monogamous, right, or are heterosexual, namely acting in accordance with their contract. It just turns out to be the case that the content of this particular contract is different than the content of this one. Here's a little bit of formal. An occurrence of X ought to phi at a context C is true if and only, this is not a typo in philosophy, we use if and only if, right? It's a logic, it's a bit of logic. X ought to phi at a context C is true if and only if phi-ing is the best course of action available to X in light of the evidence available at C. But let's say that I have a sexually open relationship. And I go out to a party, right? And I'm there with a couple friends, right? Kev's there, like, oh, yo, what up, Kev? It's Kev. Kev is on the bus, right? No. He's like, he sees me with this young lady. We've kind of been going back and forth. And unlike the lady earlier in the movie, she's actually receiving my passes rather well, right? Okay. And let's say we kind of, skedaddle a little bit, right? We leave the party, right? Or are about to leave the party. And Kev, being a really good friend, and is really sort of acting to try to be a good friend, not just to me, but to my partner. Maybe they're mutual friends or something like that. Let's say that he's like, hey, bro, if you're going to go have sex with her, you shouldn't do that. He makes the claim, right? You should not do that. I'm wanting to say that if I'm in a sexually open relationship, this claim, if we were to freeze frame it, right, that you shouldn't do that is not true, right? So we will have demonstrated at least one instance in which the claim, you ought to, namely, be sexually exclusive, is not true, right? And that would be dependent upon the agreement that I have with my partner, right? That is the ultimate truth maker, if you will, right? Whether or not this particular claim will hold. So that's pretty much what this is saying. So, how does what this has to say map onto polyamory, right? The act or practice of dating more than one partner. Well, I've kind of already said it, right? We've talked about the qualities, we've talked about the value of a relationship, and then we talked even about acting, right? How do we act in particular relationships? What kind of defines the actions that are appropriate? We've talked about loving contracts. Relational contracts. Well, it's a clear application to polyamory. I would just say, look, that polyamory or polyamorous persons, they just have a different arrangement. They just have a different contract, if you will, right? But the courses of action allowable to them are going to be determined by that contract. And that contract, again, depends on them. Not anything about a sociological convention, not anything about implicit assumptions, but about their contract. Is there an upshot? Is there an upshot? Well, the first thing is that communication, right? Communication, right? If what I have to say about love is correct, then we have to be more conscious of the way that we communicate, right? In dating relationships. That is to say that we need to sort of say what we mean what we say, right? And we have to be comfortable with expressing that, right? And I would even go as far as to say, and this is kind of me coming off the cuff, right, that, because assumptions can be dangerous, I would go as far as to say communicate explicitly as much as one can. So you're not laden by these assumptions or paradigmatic, or potential paradigmatic differences. Second thing, honesty. We talked a little bit about honesty. I think that if what I have said is true of love, then loving partners have honesty in their contracts, and they would have to, right? Partner selection, I've talked about that a little bit, how I think that it will kind of put us in a more reasonable position to sort of select our partners. And particularly in this sort of talking or dating stage, I think that it clears up the field. What do I mean? That is to say, if I'm a person that has polyamorous desires, and I've said that I have to be honest and I should communicate them explicitly whenever as best as one can or something like that, or as much as one can. That means that even before I begin dating this particular person, or talking to this particular person, I probably should express that, look, I have a desire for polyamory, or that I'm talking to other people, right? And at that point, you can either say, that's cool, I still want to kind of date you or whatever, or I don't, right? So what that does is it allows you to sort of, it kind of pairs, I think, or that it will pair sort of monogamous desiring parties with monogamous desiring parties, and polyamorous parties with polyamorous parties. Why is this important? Well, because think about all the times in our romantic relationships where we've been cheated on, right? That's just our partner actualizing a polyamorous desire, right? Namely, a desire for a particular type of relationship, usually a sexual one, right? Outside of this formal relationship, right? And we get upset, right? We're really, really distraught. Well, if contract is true, we kind of can avoid that sort of cycle of unfavorable emotions, right? Because up front, we give one another the choice or the autonomy to sort of make that choice up front. So now instead of finding out that I have polyamorous desires later on after I have sex with someone outside of our relationship, you find out up front and you no longer have to choose to get involved. You say, okay, well, we're just not compatible. Keep it going. So I think that it clears up the field in that regard. And I think the last piece is more reputable monogamous involvement. That is, I think that the integrity of formal monogamous romantic relationships will be improved, right? Will be improved because one, let's say I start off the relationship with ultimately the woman who ends up being my wife, right? As polyamorous, right? And I'm dating all these people, talking to all of these people. Then, ultimately I realize, okay, maybe she doesn't really have, the qualities that I really esteem, and you do. So people kind of begin to fall off a little bit, right? And at the end of the day, emerges like your gold medalist, right? You're one, right? You propose, you guys get married, or whatever. Because of what I've had to say about communication and about honesty, right? If I can keep it real about having polyamorous desires with my partner and then that being accepted, I do think that at least one potential worry, and a big potential worry, because when we look at divorce rates, the correlation to infidelity is huge, right? I think that our monogamous involvements later on down the road will be a lot stronger because they will be built on these sort of thicker bonds of communication and understanding, right? Or empathy, right? And which I kind of plan on talking about in an upcoming paper, tenderness, empathy, and obligation as well. Right, yeah, so I mean, you get that honesty piece in there, and after everybody kind of falls off, you know, maybe you find out that they don't have your qualities, you propose to this chick, or this woman, or this male, you say, well, you know, now I really don't have to lie to you really about it, much of anything, right? I mean, you've been rocking with me so long, right, with the honesty, that, you know, I mean, what do I have to lie to you about, really? Maybe you're cooking, but, you know, I don't know. But, so, that is kind of my take on polyamory. I do realize the objection that, well, no, when we're talking about polyamory, we're not talking about when people are dating or talking. We're actually talking about when they're in actual formal relationships or in commitments. But it's not immediately clear to me that even when I'm dating or talking to someone, right, insofar as we've laid out at least some terms of a relational contract, it's not immediately clear to me that there is no commitment there, right? It seems to be that I'm committed to them in at least some degree. Right? So I do think that the dating or talking phase might be a plausible candidate for classification as polyamory, right? And I'm still wanting to do work on that, and that's kind of what my paper is going to hopefully be able to demonstrate. And if people have been here and listening to everything that I have to say, hopefully you might think this. If he has permission to date other people, I always say yes, then whip out your phone and call someone, right? You know? Because again, I'm not encouraging just polyamory as a one-sided relation, like only males do it or only people. No, I mean, polyamory is going to be polyamory. It's going to cover both genders, which means that women are polyamorous, men are polyamorous or whatever, right? So, you know, this is kind of like an instance of like, you know, us kind of all being cool with it. You guys have been great. I think that kind of concludes. This is kind of the works that I was kind of pulling from. That kind of concludes our talk. I want to open it up for Q&A here in a second. But before I actually do that, if you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter at Urfavfilosopher, on Instagram at Urfavfilosopher. And I would really like for you all to take a visit to my domain, urfavfilosopher.me. And that is a place where you can not only you know, see what all is going on with me, but you know, maybe listen to a little bit of my music as well. So yeah, that's I guess it for today. I guess I can leave this up. I have one more slide that says Q&A and it's blank, but I'll leave this up in case people are wanting to write. But right now, I guess I'm kind of wanting to open up the floor and kind of have some discussion.